it's really important to realise with this conflict and with Ukraine is how it's changed everything. It's actually changed the world. It's actually changed geopolitics. I work in Brussels, Brussels correspondent, and I remember really, really well in February 2022 when Russia invaded, and everybody thought it was going to be over in a matter of days or weeks. That was the absolute prevailing wisdom. The Americans, everybody. So all these the sinister NATO militarists were absolutely convinced, Kiev would fall matter of days or weeks. There was only one country that didn't hold that outlook, and it was Britain. Ben Wallace, the then Defence Secretary, and he said, "No, the Ukrainians will fight back. You watch. It won't be over in days or weeks. Ukrainian sovereignty is real." And I remember a German official. He'd said this at NATO. And I remember a German official say to me, "Oh well, it's a Brexit delusion. He's delusional. His mind has been addled by Brexit. He's convinced that national sovereignty is that real, that Ukraine can survive." It's really important to remember that in April 2022, Russia abandoned its attempt to take Kiev. It abandoned its attempt to essentially destroy Ukraine as an independent state. Actually, having neutrality in your constitution because your large, powerful neighbour demands it is not being an independent, sovereign nation state. So it's really interesting it's very important to realise that Ukraine has overturned, along with Israel in many ways, the dominance in international relations of the so-called realism. And the realist doctrine is that a small country like Ukraine cannot stand up to a big country by military means. Basically surrender. It's kind of a cynical defeatism, if you like. Ukraine has overturned that in geopolitics. It is no longer certain that the weak country will always fold. It is no longer the rule of international relations that might ends up being right. The dial has shifted. It's really important to realise that when Putin invaded Ukraine, and we don't really know why he did it then, but a big factor, I think, and I know this is arguable, is that it came after the fall of Kabul. And it came after the fall of Kabul when there was a real perception across the world, rightly actually, that the West was weak. It was disorganised. It couldn't hold the line. And I think it's all important for us to note that the West is still weak. The moral malaise very much still remains in the West, and the Ukraine conflict hasn't really changed, for example, the realism of Germany and the sort of nationalism and desire to maintain national sovereignty of the Poles. That kind of fault line still runs through the West, like the word Brighton in a stick of rock. So there is a cynical debate going on at the moment, particularly in Brussels, about the importance of changes in the White House, the prospect of Trump coming, because again it's this realism. It's if the US wants it to be over, it will be over. That's the reality of international relations, and I think there is an element there because of truth, because there is an element by which the US is instrumentalizing. It's using the Ukraine conflict for its own national interests. I mean, that's what countries do, after all. And perhaps they don't have the kind of principled moral attachment to Ukraine's national sovereignty that actually Europeans should have, because the principle of national sovereignty is one that America has not been a great friend of throughout the 20th century, let alone the 21st century. But for Europeans, it's which is essentially quite a small geographical area of a lot of nation states, national sovereignty is very, very important. We've had that discussion in many ways in terms of the European Union. And I want to highlight one aspect to which actually the West really isn't helping Ukraine. I think it's going to start becoming a bit of a debate. I mean, there are around 4.5 million, that's for Commission's statistics, there are about 4.5 million Ukrainians living in EU territory. They have something called a temporary protection, which is a special status, which means they're able to work. That legal status is ongoing until March 2026, so for quite a long time. That's a lot of people. That's 10% of Ukraine's population has gone to the EU. Many of those people, we don't really know how much, we know it's a lot, are working. And in fact, whole swathes of construction in Central and Eastern Europe, logistics all over Europe, are now staffed by Ukrainians. So that's having a real impact on Ukraine's war effort, because quite a lot of those people are of fighting age, and quite a lot of those people have got their loyalties being divided by the prospects of living and working in the West. And we have to remember that, look at what that pull did to some countries that are in the European Union. Lithuania lost 30% of its population. After Ceausescu, Bulgaria has lost 28.2%, Romania 17.8%. So the EU itself, just in terms of its proximity and its openness to countries, actually saps their strength. It actually cuts the throat of many of these countries. And I don't know if you've ever been to the Baltic states, so go to Baltics. If you go to a country like Lithuania, it is very sad. Lithuania is visibly depopulated. So that's no service. That's one way in which the West's help is actually destroying Ukraine.
Okay.